Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Rapid City Special Council meeting for Wednesday, August 22nd, 2018. I'd like to start the meeting with a roll call and determination of quorum. Please, Heidi.
Solomon, Modrick, Nordstrom, Drew, Scott, Drury, Laurenti, Roberts, Armstrong, Lewis. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Heidi. And now I invite everybody in the audience as well as up at the dais to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to start our meeting tonight. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. There are a couple people in the audience tonight. I'd like to open it up for general public comment. If there's anything anyone wants to address the seated City Council members on tonight, I currently have no speaker request forms. Seeing none, we're going to move on to tonight's agenda. This is a special council meeting in order to discuss the 2019 budget as presented by the mayor. So at this time, this discussion is to find out if there's any concerns, if there's any request for additional data prior to approving for 2 readings the budget, if there's any request to invite speakers to an additional meeting. So I'd like to open it up, and if anybody has any comments or questions for the general discussion. I don't know if you want to start off with expenses, an overall concept of the budget, the revenue streams, so I'll just open it out there for anyone to bring up any comments. And seeing, there we go. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom. Richie, questions, concerns? Do you have anyone that you'd like to invite to hear from specifically, or do you just want to start a general conversation?
I'll avoid the general conversation and see if we can't get something started on the specificity side. What I'm interested in is using IT as an example. What do they get and how do they do that for their revenue side? Just the revenue side is what I'm needing information on. And the expenses, that's a different conversation for another time. But just the revenue side, how do they get their revenue? And the IT is just an example to start with.
So I mean, you're giving IT as an example. So do you have specific departments that you want to know how their revenue is generated or how their revenue stream is generated? Do you want to make that request by department so that we can request that information in next time, or are you just wanting an overall discussion of how the revenue stream works for the city?
If I may just stay specifically with the IT department, because I think the information we're going to be gathering off of that will create conversations after the budget hearings into the future, into next year as well. So if I may just start off with the IT department, just the revenue side only.
Well, I think that one is fairly simple because that's a general fund department. So if you don't mind directing that question to Pauline Sumption, she can probably give you a quick answer on that.
Start.
Sure. IT does not generate revenue other than through interdepartmental charges through the central services from other funds.
If I may, Madam Chair, I just got a short briefing on how that operation works on just the revenue side of it now. But as far as understanding how the formula works, and I believe Mr. Kerbanoff is involved in that, setting up that formula as well. And just a little bit that I've been able to gain from that information, the revenue side is primarily done through the IDC, interdepartmental charges. And I'm not clear that I totally understand all of the revenue side and how it's generated for the IT division for right now.
If you want to know how the central services interdepartmental charges are calculated, that is definitely a question for Sean.
Yes.
He's the one that has worked with the departments to try to figure out how to do that. I I don't have that information. I apologize for that.
No, that's quite all
But
right.
that really is the only revenue that IT has. There currently is no other revenue source for IT other than the taxes that are generated through the
Yeah.
the general fund.
Just to be clear.
Thank you, Pauline, but
Yeah.
Alderman Nordstrom, so you've kind of narrowed this discussion currently down to just the IT department, but
Yes.
as you've said, now it's expanded out to the interdepartmental charges, and the city council members did receive the interdepartmental charges and pelts and the values that are being charged over the last 10 years. One of the questions, if I can just dovetail on that with you, one of the questions that I was going to request, whether it comes to the city council members offline and then is just linked on a hearing, one of the hearings that we actually have to pass the budget, is I would like those calculations to come up with the value of each one of those, because some of them participate in what you're calling that central calculation.
Central services,
There's
yeah.
other charges on the interdepartmental charges that have remained the same for years, and I know when I've asked in the past for the calculations, there really is no calculation that comes up to that amount. So if I can just kind of dovetail on you and say, we will make a request to have the calculations for all the interdepartmental charges and pelts supplied to the city council.
If I'm looking at the same data that you're looking at for the IDC, is that the numbers are all over the board, and how they came up
Right.
with them, I'm not sure how that's done. And so
Correct.
I'm using IT as an example to start off with, to help me understand how the rest of that whole chart is calculated. So-
And I appreciate that, Alderman Nordstrom, but again, we don't want to get into the weeds at this point, so I'd rather make the request for all the calculations, and then if you want to tailor it through or track it through just one department to get your understanding, that'd be perfect.
Very good, thank you.
All right? So thank you. So what we've had is a discussion and a potential request for interdepartmental charges calculations and pelt calculations. So any discussion from another? Chair recognizes Alderman Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for the sake of discussion, don't know if the mayor can hear this, but I do appreciate the hard work that he put into this year's budget. There was a lot of cutting. We have an extremely conservative view of our incoming revenue for the next year. And I think that's wise because we don't know the impact of the online sales tax revenue that it will have. And I think it's wise for us to plan to not have as much. And then, of course, we can be delighted if it does come in more than we expect. So one, just kudos to the mayor. Two, I don't know about you, I've had a number of folks that received the community investments reach out regarding the 2.5% cuts many of them had across the board. And I know it's frustrating because everybody's budgets get tightened everywhere, but the cities is tightened too. And the reason I will support the mayor's cuts on the investments is because they have to share in what we have to deal with the budget. Meaning, I guess, really quick. Pardon me, I have a story. When, growing up, I remember at 13 years old, I asked my dad, can I have a $5 a week allowance like all my friends have? My dad, who installed carpet for a living, earned his paycheck week to week. And they thought about it and came back, and we didn't have a whole lot, but he said, you know what I'll do? I'll give you 1% of my paycheck for that week. And so one week, if I had a really awesome week, you might get $5. But on a normal week, it might be $3. And you'll find out on those weeks that you only get $1, that those are tough weeks. You're a member of this family, and so you're going to share when things are well, and you're going to understand when things are not well. I think the same is true to our budget. We have a year where our revenues are not anticipated to be as strong as we would like. So if you're a part of this community, a part of the family of Rapid City, then you're going to have to share in that burden with us, because it's really difficult for me to look at our departments such as the police department or Public Works and say we're going to slash yours by hundreds or millions of dollars, whatever the case may be, and not be willing to slash 2.5% off of our investments. So this is kind of the situation as we look through that, and I know it's frustrating to those who receive funding from the city, but they have to share in the burden like all the departments do. And then, and sometimes we're going to have great years and we're going to be able to help out more, and other times we'll all have to kind of tighten our belts, and I think this is a tightening our belts year. But I did want to make that comment because I know it's frustrating and it's easy to vilify the mayor for doing that. However, I think there are sometimes you have to do that. And I think this year is one of those years. And so I just wanted to get that out there as part of this discussion. I know that they're paying attention. We do care about all of those things when we look at organizations like Wavy, Cornerstone, Allied Arts, all of those. We do care about those. We're still funding those. But they're going to share in that restrictions that we've placed on the city departments as well, and they should. If they're part of this community, they're part of the family, and they should feel it, just much like I had to do as a teenager. And so just a few comments as we kick off this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Alderwoman Drew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just kind of piggybacking on what Alderman Solomon had to say. Usually when these cuts come across for, I don't know, primarily the arts or culture, those kinds of things, they seem to be the big targets in a lot of years. This year, we see that it's more equitable. There are more cuts even to some of the so-called sacred cows. You know, the library's being cut, the Parks Department is being cut. There's a lot of things that are generally not touched. So I think that's why I'm not hearing the outcry from the arts community as I have before, that they feel like it's more equitable and not that they're just targets because they're easy targets and, you know, something you can cut. Now, I know the library and also the Parks Department, they have private fundraising organizations, their foundations, they can go to those, and I think they'll find the help they need there from the community. So I think they're feeling confident. And in talking with the Arts Council, you know, yeah, they don't really want to have this cut, but they don't want to, they're in a very stable place right now. They want to show that to the city, that they can be part of the family, as Jason alluded to, that, you know, if everybody's going this route, that they can pitch in and do their share as well. So I think that my general feeling on those particular cuts is that everybody's okay with it. The only thing I would like to know personally, and you can ask, I'd like to know a little bit more about the 23% increase in the detox funds. Maybe we could get somebody in here to explain that to me. I know we're getting new facilities. I know we're combining facilities. Some of that I thought was supposed to take care of some of that expense, but still it's going up. So I'd just like to know, you know, why it's so much higher when we were supposed to get, you know, combined services.
Okay, so I'm hearing that you potentially want to invite a speaker
Yes, I
to our
think
next
so.
meeting
I
if we
think
do
that's
hold
what
a
I'd like to
second
do.
next meeting.
Just not
so.
only for myself, but I think a lot of people in the community want to just know more about this particular project. So, you know, I don't know that this is, you know, a hot button item for a lot of people, but I think it will become such as we go get closer to completing these projects and getting this thing online.
Right. Pauline Sumption may have a partial answer for you if she
Okay,
may not
great.
be able to answer everything. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll
Hear
listen to
from
Pauline.
Pauline?
She kind of seems to know what's going on, so.
I try as part of my job to know. With Detox, this has been an ongoing discussion since we started giving them money out of CIP for this new facility. We were already partners with them in the facility in North Rapid, and that is a much smaller facility than what we're getting over on the old NAU campus. And so because it's a larger facility, they'll have more beds, they'll have more overhead, they'll have more direct costs associated with that as well. And our contract is that we share, I believe it's 50-50 with the county outside of any outside funding, like state grants, that type of thing.
That was going to be my next question. I didn't know if they were getting, you know, if they were really involved in getting grants or, you know, their fundraising side of things. Do they have a person that's really designated for that kind of work?
You know, I'm not sure if the county does or not. I just know that because of the nature of the business of the detox facility, that they do get state and federal funding that does come in, and then the rest is just split 50-50 with us. And so because of the larger facilities and the bigger impact we can have on the community, that also gives us an increase in costs.
Just for my own edification, I'd like to know, you know, what we mean by bigger. I mean, more beds, more staff, more personnel, more food costs. What exactly, medical, what it is that would be those costs. So, Madam Chair, that would be what I would want to hear more about.
A more in-depth conversation.
Yeah,
Pauline,
yeah.
and a follow-up question on that one, since you brought it up, is since there's this agreement, contract agreement, whatever it is, between the city and the county, is that renewed, is it set for a specific period of time so that it's reviewed and renewed, or is it just more like an agreement in place that it's just in place until someone, either the county or the city, wants to revisit it?
You know, I know that the sheriff has talked about looking at it again, that one and dispatch and some other things. I don't think there's a deadline on this contract. I think it's a year-to-year type of thing. I would have to pull it to double check.
So that may be, if we do invite the speaker in, if we hold a second meeting, we may want to include the contract information on that discussion as well. Chair would like to I'm sorry.
Madam
Alderwoman
Chair,
Drew, you still
one
have the
last
floor,
question.
Yes.
Is it considered possible to even get a county person in here, a county commissioner, or someone to talk about their involvement in this?
We can put out the request, we can put out the
I
invitation.
mean, since this is something that they're working on too with the mental health detox, all those kinds of things are in their purview right now, that they're kind of percolating on some of those things. I would almost like to have somebody from the county here to explain what their contribution is here.
Okay,
Okay? Thank you.
thank you. And are you done, because you still have the floor?
I'm done.
All right. And the chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the Finance Director, if I may, please.
Sure.
And it might be just a request for the next budget hearing. She may not have the answer now. I probably should have fielded this to her earlier, but the first question I have is the percentage of the CPI that we're taking, or that is being proposed for the 2019 budget.
I believe it's 1.7%.
And what, do we know the dollar value of that?
I can pull up my spreadsheet.
And I'm sorry, Pauline, what was that percentage?
1.7.
1.7. So as a reminder to everyone that city councils about, I think it was about 2011 or 2012, something like that, passed a resolution that the mayor prepares his budget, and if it includes the CPI, then the city council has to take a separate vote to approve the CPI on or before the second reading of the budget. So the CPI discussion, so I just want to, obviously the mayor, because Pauline said it's 1.7%, the mayor has included in his budget, so I just want to caution everyone, if there is a desire to remove that portion, once Pauline tells us how much it is, we either have to take a cut someplace in the budget, or you're going to have to re-identify another revenue source to make up the difference. Pauline, did that give you time?
You did. $285,379.
285,379
Correct.
CPI increase. Is there any other information you need?
I do.
Okay.
It's not necessarily information, but I do have some conversation for that as well, especially given light of the, as we all are aware, the presentation by the mayor's office on this particular item. This wasn't obviously highlighted in the conversation, but I just also want the viewers to understand that the CPI increase, the Consumer Price Index, it's a nice word the government adds to property tax increase. I don't know why we just don't call it a property tax increase. If we're going to call ourselves a transparent government, let's be transparent. I mean, CPI, really? It's embarrassing to me, but. So the clarification is the CPI is a property tax increase. In the mayor's presentation, he talked about, and I want to just correct a little bit of the record, not to say that he was wrong, but the three major parts of our revenue are fees, sales tax, and property tax. We all know this. This has been the case since probably the beginning of this municipal government. Maybe the sales tax wasn't quite there yet, but we all know that sales tax is extremely important to the city government being able to deliver the services that they need to deliver. We all know that. Property taxes as well. Fees as well. So to say that we need to diversify our revenue streams, in my opinion, this is my opinion, is code word for increasing certain areas. And I agree that there are certain areas that we need to look at. If there are fees that haven't been adjusted for many, many years, we need to look at whether those fees are paying for those services. And one of the questions that I have in that area, and I was hoping that a representative from the attorney's office would be here, was I don't want to say legality, but I just want to make sure we're on firm footing that indeed, if we have fees we're increasing and we're already turning some of that fee revenue back to the general fund, can we do that? Can we do that legally? It was my understanding that fees needed to generate the revenue necessary to deliver the prerequisite services that are provided for those fees, where those fees are charged. So that's a question I have for the attorney's office, which I can bring up at the next budget hearing, but that's another one of the pieces that I have. So getting back to the sales tax, and I'm going to keep talking. I think I'll be able to achieve it, but if some of you, I think everybody here was at last year's budget that's sitting here in the dais. I requested information on property and sales tax, and I can't remember, Pauline, maybe you can help me, but I think it was for the last 10 or 12 years prior. But the fact of the matter is, those areas have been extremely important to our revenue. Those things have always delivered. If I remember right, our sales tax, and I'll send it out to all of the council members again so that they can see it. We all know it's down this year, or from last year to this year, we all know it's down, but the average is over 4% in sales tax revenue from year to year for the last 10 or 12 or 15 years. I'll send it out again so we all have that again, including property tax as well, has always been very healthy. So in the mayor's presentation, it seemed like, at least I got the feeling, this is my opinion, that we really need to do something else to diversify our revenue because we just aren't generating enough. But the reality is we're generating tons of revenue, in sales tax especially. It has grown, I know, over 4%. We have a federal government that's doing backflips right now because they grew the economy again finally in the last quarter over 4%. So it's very good growth to have an average or to achieve 4% or more in tax revenue growth or in GDP or anything in that particular area. The problem we have is not revenue. The problem is not making sure that we diversify our revenue. I agree that we need to look at some of these things, and we're going to do that. But we all need to understand that our revenues have been very good year after year after year for a very, very long time. Spending has been the problem. If you all remember last year's budget from 17 to 18, I think the growth in that budget last year was over 9%, correct? I'm just guessing, but I believe it was 9%, and we're near 1% this year, and we were spending untold amounts of money in undesignated cash last year. Unfortunately, there were only two of us trying to force the 2018 budget to be balanced. We don't have balanced budgets. When we're spending money we don't have, which is called undesignated cash, which we don't have that issue this year, but it's because we spent it all last year. So this is not a balanced budget either. This budget is balanced on us passing increases onto fee payers and to the property tax owners of Rapid City. This is not a balanced budget. Budgets are supposed to be balanced based on a projection of the revenues that we're going to receive. In my opinion, this is my opinion. If I were putting this budget together, it would be based on a conservative projection of growth of these three major areas: fees, sales tax, property tax. But we aren't doing that. And the council, we're here to check that. We're here to make sure that when somebody says they're going to deliver a balanced budget, that that's indeed what the taxpayers really get. We're here to check that. We're here to make sure that that's what they get. So when they hear those words in the presentation from the mayor's office, not just this mayor, Every mayor I think that I've served under since I've been on the council has used those words. And I have voted against previous budgets where I have had problems with them trying to balance budgets on the backs of the taxpayers. And that's what we're doing here. This CPI increase is $285,000, not just for this next budget year, but for every year after it. So in 10 years, this is another $2,850,000 taken from the taxpayers over the next 10 years. The CPI, did we take one last year? But every time I take a CPI, I just want to make sure that we understand and that the viewers understand that this property tax increase, called the CPI, is for this year and every year for eternity. It's not something to be taken lightly. That's why when I came onto this council, I fought to, and I supported a resolution that had to be voted on separately because it's that important. It's the taxpayers' money. And we're supposed to balance the budget based on what we already get from the taxpayers, not what we can get more from the taxpayers. I'm going to yield for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to follow up, Alderman Laurenti, with your question that was being posed to the city attorney's office, since Joel Andine is in the audience. Joel, would you give us an opinion, please, of if I can shape the question, and then if I don't have it correct, I hope Alderman Laurenti chimes in and corrects me. But I believe the framing of the question was, in a department of the city, if they are fee-based, are they limited to only collecting those fees to operate their department, or do the fees generally just go into the general fund in case there's like a fantastic year where there's a lot of services for that, whatever that fee is being based on? Can you give us an opinion of, do we have to give money back, or does it just go into the general fund? What's the legality of?
Well, I know with the building inspection fee increase, there was talk, well, it's going into the general fund. Well, that's because building inspection is paid for out of the general fund. So it goes into the fund in which that expense comes out of. So there's nothing inappropriate about that. You know, it's not that a fee, if it exceeds the amount, is illegal. It's just the distinction between a fee and a tax. Generally, a fee is meant to recoup cost, and a tax is meant to raise revenue. So how you classify it, if it is a revenue generator, then the courts have said, then that's a tax. It doesn't make it illegal. It just changes what you call it. If there's authorization to charge that, and there isn't a limit that says, or a restriction, you know, there's a good chance you can charge more than what the specific cost is, and it's still legal. Although, you know, we call it a fee because it is going in to pay for this service. Now, if you truly want a fee, whether it's legal or not, you should charge what it costs for that service. But, you know, then that gets complicated, because right now, one of the reasons the fees are low is because how do we really look at what the cost of this is? And we don't necessarily look at it the same way a business does. So I heard one of the commenters make the comment, well, Brad Solon's department or his division gave money back at the end of the year. Well, Brad Solon isn't paying interdepartmental charges for IT, finance, legal, even though I know somebody from my office is probably dealing with building inspection issues on a weekly basis. So there's a lot of additional costs there that frankly aren't accounted for right now, that I believe the mayor's office is working on to show that just what Brad Solon's budget is right now does not actually reflect the true cost of the building inspection department. You know, he's not paying overhead. He's not paying for their share of the CSAC upkeep or maintenance or utilities or IT support or any of that right now. So when you look at just his budget currently and what that is versus how much revenue is generated by building inspection fees, it is not a true reflection of what the cost of the building inspection program is. And that is something that frankly in other areas except for the true enterprise funds, in the general fund we maybe haven't accounted for because we haven't needed to. But now that's probably going to be something that we have to take a closer look at. and you're going to have to consider when we talk about fees. If, when that's done, the amount of revenue raised still exceeds that, then that'll be a question of whether we have legal authority to do that or not. And then it's just a question, if we have legal authority to do it, whether you want to do it in order to support the general fund or whether you don't.
Right. Thank you. Alderman Laurenti, follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to make it a little simpler. I mean, just so that viewers and the rest of us completely understand. For me, it's boiling down, the question I really had was, when we're charging a fee, say for building permits, and that fee generates, let's say, 20 or 30% more than it takes to deliver taking care of all of those building permits, including legal costs and any other interdepartmental charges. Are we on firm footing in doing that?
I'm still looking at that, but yeah, I think if there is legal authority to charge, there is specific legal authority to charge a fee for that. If there isn't a law that limits it to strictly the amount that it costs for that, then you may be on legal footing. The distinction, though, then becomes, you know, the argument, is it really a fee or is it a tax because it's generating revenue?
Right, so that's
Just because it generates revenue doesn't in and of itself
Agreed.
make it illegal.
But are we in trouble because we're advertising it as a fee? We don't say anything about this being a tax as well, that it would cover something other than what it's trying to deliver. So that's the hard part for me. When we get down to brass tacks here, or, you know, on this particular issue, I want to know that we're on firm footing. So I appreciate your working on that, Joel. So I'll look forward to your feedback as we move it to the next budget hearing. So I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Alderman Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to kind of go a little forward of what we were just talking about here. Can I ask Pauline a question, please?
You may.
Thank you. Pauline, could you get us the information on what revenue was generated out of that department compared to what the cost of the department was to run?
Like Joel said, because we haven't accounted for any interdepartmental charges such as the attorney's office, IT, finance, HR, this building, we don't have those readily available. We are currently working on them, and so
I don't need all those charges in there. I just need to know what they generated for 2017.
But that won't give you the true picture, though, because
That's all right.
I'm telling you,
That's all right. I would like to see those numbers. I'm just curious to see those numbers.
I guess it makes me wonder why that would be all right when we're asking about if the
Well, you know, if that
overcharging.
number is $50,000, it's no big deal. If that number is $600,000, it might be a big deal.
Well-
So I'm just curious what the number is.
And-
I think
and-
I have the right to know
Well, and I was going to
that.
say, and it's a request of information, so if I could kind of corral that a bit, do you want to
Yes.
see revenue and expenses for the building departments themselves for the last 5 years, for the last 3 years, for just
No,
last year?
I would like to see it for the last, I think 3 years would be
3
enough.
years. So, Pauline, is it possible to, we'll add that to our list of just providing that information for the last 3 years, 2016, 2017, and 2018? Well, no, it'd be 2015, 2016, and 2017.
So we can have full years.
Yes, yeah. So, okay, we've got, the
Thank
floor
you.
is still yours, Alderman
Nope, that's
Roberts?
fine. That's all I needed. Thank you.
There's no one else in the queue, so I'll just bring up the 3 points that I had currently written down. So one of the things that I wanted to emphasize, but Alderman Laurenti already said that, is I did want to make a point that the mayor and department directors, they were all intricately involved in coming up with this budget, but as Alderman Laurenti said, my opinion is also they didn't have a choice. In 2017 budget, the mayor balanced the budget by dipping into undesignated cash to balance the budget $3.5 million. And in the 2018 budget, it was an additional $1.3 million of undesignated cash that balanced it. And if you take a look at our current reserves, we're dipping into the reserves as it is now. We're still anticipating a property tax payment in November for the October collections, but unless there is a huge change in the spending, and I know department directors are working really hard on trying to curb their expenses for this second half of the year, What I'm looking at, in my opinion, we're going to still be into the reserves at the end of this year when all is said and done. So there literally is no undesignated cash left over unless you actually want to consider the reserves now undesignated cash. So I think we're going to be hard pressed to put that money back into the reserves for a little bit. So with that being said, I do think the department directors and the mayor worked really hard at that. I am also concerned, and that's why I'm looking at the interdepartmental charges. The CPI has an increase, or is being used, an increase of the CPI and property taxation of $285 is helping to fund the 2019 budget. The mayor's presentation provided two other increases in revenue sources. One of them was fees, primarily the building fee structure. And the question was already posed at that time that this budget, if passed, is relying or contingent upon the city council approving that fee structure increase. So if that doesn't happen, then the budget will have to be amended, or supplemental appropriation will have to be made that'll actually be a cut. Is that still the correct term, Pauline, that if we were going to cut the budget, would it still be a supplemental appropriation?
That would be the proper way to do it, instead of just relying on staff to not spend it.
Yes, so we would have to be I know ever since I've been on the council, supplemental appropriations have all been to increase the budget as needs came forward, but I think we would have to be looking at something to decrease spending. So then that brings up the third one was the interdepartmental charges. I know that the city council, as of Monday night, just passed for the second reading our water rate increases. And I have been a proponent of making sure that the enterprise funds are being fairly treated and that the rate payers are not being asked to pay more just so that those enterprise funds can be rated in order to offset our general fund in order to be seen as a revenue source. So that's my primary focus on the interdepartmental charges and pelts, is I really want to see the calculations to make sure that they are fair. I don't want to have it be known, and I'm not saying it is yet because I'm still looking at it, but I would hate to think that the city council raised the water rates, raised the water discharge rates or wastewater rates, and the whole reason that I know I voted to pass those was to build up our reserves, not influx a revenue source into our general fund. So I still want to look at that. That's the primary reason I want to look at those, because I will not approve or I will not support interdepartmental charges increase if we're actually rating enterprise funds after we already put for the taxpayers, our rate payers, that they're going to have to pay these fees. So I really do believe that there is a separation of enterprise funds, and they need to support themselves. Yes, they do need to be charged for the services general fund departments offer, such as finance and attorney fees and the HR department, but that's where there needs to be a formula. Is it going to be perfect? We've had this discussion before. No. But you get a rough idea, or you make it fair, whether it's based on the percentage of their budget, or you make it, how many FTEs each of them have. You come up with a formula that can be applied across to get some type of common sense revenue into the general fund to offset those costs. So just so everyone up here knows my concern on the interdepartmental charges. So with that said, Pauline, no one else is still buzzed in, so I'm just kind of still talking here. But here's my question to you. The mayor presented his budget, and it's not a line item budget. It wasn't hard numbers. He was basically setting up the revenue and how he was going to balance it with revenue against the expenses. And when I asked him, what does that look like, he said, well, once it gets approved, then it goes to finance, and then the hard numbers are put into place. Okay, so hypothetically, what I'm getting at here is, if the city council says we're not going to approve the CPI or the fees or both or whatever, what does that do to the budget? I mean, in the past, the reason I've always tried to offer out a 3% reduction across the board is because if a department had $1 million, then they lost 3% of that. If a department had $9 million, they just lost 3%. So it was kind of, in my mind, equitable. Because I don't think as a city council we can sit here and say, specifically line item where we're going to cut any other additional money if we choose to. So does that just go back to finance, and you and the department directors and the mayor will figure out where those cuts come from?
That would be probably my request and recommendation, because I know there were times that I've sat with mayors and department directors, and the mayor just says, I'm slashing this, 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 and this, here's your new budget, without giving any input to the department directors, and they know their budget better than anyone. They know where they could possibly take those cuts. So that would be my recommendation, is to say, okay, I want, you can even narrow it down to which departments you want to cut and how much, and let them do it, or you can just say, I mean, that's what I would suggest. is
Okay,
you
so
figure-
what I'm hearing you say is that we don't have to, because we do have a deadline of having 2 readings passed by October 1st. And I know in order to get the 10 of us to try to agree to where to take these cuts and stuff, I mean, that's almost like asking for a full year study and everything. So I'm glad to hear that as the city council, just like the mayor did, as a city council, if we just say, we want the budget to be this amount, and if it's increased or decreased, we just send it back to you, and then you, by law, have to come up with a balanced budget in order to have the expenses match the revenue flows.
That's my responsibility. I will tell you, though, even with this case, so when I have, I don't know, my 4 org codes in my finance office, plus I had the CSAC building and a few other little things, he said, this is what I want your bottom line to be. And then I went in and decided where I was making cuts to get to the bottom line that he wanted me to be. So I guess that is what I would somewhat expect from you guys too, is to say, okay, I want this department to cut another $300,000, and this department $25,000, and $25,000, and $50,000, or whatever you guys end up doing. But I think it needs to be specific as to the department, and let them figure out where within their budgets they can cut that to that number.
Thank you, that's helpful. And I believe I've talked long enough where I've encouraged other council members to chime in again. Chair, we'd like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to dovetail on that, because that was the whole point of priority-based budgeting. When it comes to us, this is my opinion again, so I want to keep it to that, is that we are ultimately responsible to answer to the people who elect us. The staff are not elected. They're here to do a job, do it day in and day out. So they know much better than we do, and on top of the fact that we've adopted priority-based budgeting, that they've got 3rd and 4th quartile areas for their departments. I don't think we should even go near saying what department. I think we want to send it, if we agree that we're not going to take whatever parts of the budget that are based on whatever these increases are, with fees, with the property tax increase, then it just needs to go back to the mayor's office and to finance. And those people are very good at what they do. As the finance officer said, they know their budgets inside and out. They know all the details. They have their priority-based budgeting. They have their quartiles. So those areas that are low in priority as far as delivering their mission for their particular area, they know exactly where they can go, where it's going to have the least effect on delivering what we need to deliver to the property tax or taxpayers out there, to the citizens. So I think that would be absolutely the best thing to do. I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Alderman Solomon.
Thank you, and I had some similar sentiments as Alderman Laurenti, because I think for us to kind of go in and cherry pick what we think, how we think every department should spend that money is a little foolish. We're not we're not attorneys, we're not HR, the IT. I think that's good. 2, I anticipate we are going to make further cuts, whether it be reduction or not taking the CPI, which I did not last year, and I'm not inclined to do so this year. So it's a big one, and also the building code or the building permit fees. We shouldn't just look at the departments themselves. I think we ought to take a look at the community investments as well. I mean, I just tallied up just one slide to see how much of that our community investments that we have. So as we're looking at making those fees, we can direct to say, you don't necessarily have to take it out of the departments. You can take it out of, everything, or various community investments, or council contingencies, 50 grand right there. I mean, there are things that we're going to have to figure out. So if we don't want to have the building permit fees, or we don't want to take the CPI, then we're going to at least have to give direction on where those cuts should be, whether it's go back to the departments and you guys cut, or if we think that the community investments could be cut further. And there might be some things in there that will be worth discussing, but I think it's easy for us to say, let's cut, but we should have some sort of general direction for the staff to say, don't, either look at your departments, or look at community investments, or look at them all, whatever the case may be. But those are the hard decisions I think we have to make. But I will say the department directors have cut their budgets quite a bit from where it started. And we know they need to operate, they're operating very lean, as opposed to what they really would like to have. And yet we give quite a bit of community investments out. And when I talked about sharing that burden, this is what I'm talking about. And I already know the police department can't do certain things because they don't have the budget to do so. How am I supposed to turn around and not expect the same of certain community investments? And then some of these, do we have any redundancies? Do we have, I think those are the kind of questions we have to answer. So if we are going to cut, we need to start thinking about giving better general guidelines, other than departments, you just figure it out, which is fine if you want to slash the department's budgets, but they're not the only part of the budget to grab that 285,000 or 485,000, whatever it ends up being. I would guess I would just encourage you to go in there and look at that. You're going to and we have to kind of give some general direction. And I see the mayor's here.
Would
Mayor,
you like to ask the mayor a question?
Well, Mayor, did you have some thoughts on the discussions that we've had so far? You're up at the podium ready to talk, so I'll give you some time.
I do, just some comments. I don't need to make a big speech or anything like that. So on the topic of cutting services, balancing budget, getting the expenditures down, and so on, I believe I've given a pretty rounded view of what the issue is with the revenue and the expenditures, and some of the things we're not completely in control of, such as the union contracts at this point. We were in control of them once, and we, including me, failed to exercise a contract that would put us in a better position today. So we know what those dates are, and we'll act accordingly. Priority-based budgeting was not designed for cutting services or slashing budgets as much as it was designed for reprioritizing where we spend money. So taking the lower priority programs, the funds that go to the lower priority programs, and pushing them into the high priority programs, because status quo suggests that we come here and say, we need more police, fire, we need more streets, we need these high priority things. And status quo says that we want to just create more revenue to get those things. Priority-based budgeting suggests that we find the money that's already in the budget and shift it upward from lower to higher priority. So that's kind of been the dilemma this year, is that we don't have we haven't had the real luxury, in my opinion, with this budget of shifting that revenue from lower to higher, because there's been a greater emphasis on trimming those budgets. So in that case, the policy decisions will override the influence of priority-based budgeting. We have the ability, and maybe sometimes even the necessity, with a single vote, to completely undermine the priority-based budgeting philosophy. So that's a powerful tool, and potentially a dangerous one. It has to be done very carefully. But for example, there's been a lot of suggestions about trimming and the expenses and that sort of thing. But and this isn't an attack or an indictment on any of you or even any past councils, but I don't remember any city council members, past or present, saying, well, I think we need less blank department services. We need less, and name the services that you feel like we should do without. So when that's left up to someone like me to decide which services we trim, knowing that there's a risk that when I come in here and present, that the groups affected by those cuts will lobby you and maybe get those decisions reversed, it seems like that's a little out of order, that we could use the policy decision, whether it's a decision or just a philosophy, during the process building up to the presentation, not so much after. So it doesn't have to be public, it doesn't have to be big drama, but it could be you sending an email or walking in and talking to me and telling me, I think as a city we provide too much of A, B, and C, and we ought to trim those things back. Because I guarantee you there's millions of dollars delivering A, B, and C that could be reused. But that's a very difficult thing. That's where the rubber hits the road, and that's where the citizens' eyes and ears perk up and they come in here to defend those things that are dear to them. So I think on this particular budget, we've done as good a job as we can do, still keeping the integrity of the priority-based budgeting philosophy intact. So the cuts have been made at this point with a scalpel and sometimes a steak knife. Any further cuts, I think, will have to be a machete and will be a little more damaging to the services we deliver. But all I'm saying is, this is reality. We are in reality, and I would welcome your suggestions on where to take the money. The only thing I think would be counterproductive was something that was mentioned last year, and that was give the departments some percentage of their budget and let them spend that, and then when that money's gone, have them come in and get approval for each of the purchases after that. So putting you in a position to do that type of micromanagement on the day-to-day purchases kind of undermines the whole structure of the executive branch and the managers that we have employed here. So I think the opportunity missed this year was coming together beforehand to discuss these types of things. But I'm here to tell you I'm willing to cooperate, willing to do whatever this council directs within reason to make things work out better. And as a final note, and I'll quit talking, you can ask me questions if you want to. On the building permit revenue issue, I know you feel some pressure right now to decide this and debate this right now in order to pass the budget. I would encourage you to pass the budget on its own timetable, separate timetable, deal with the revenue, the building permit revenue issue separately between now and the end of the year. And if a counter decision is made on that, we will adjust this budget. That revenue was not put in there. I didn't draw attention to that to try to hold you hostage to make you vote yes, even though there's almost no other way it could have come out. We will adjust that budget if you decide not to adopt that building permit revenue increase. Okay, I just want to reassure you that it will be okay for you to take them on their own timelines, and whichever decision you come to, we will deal with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Alderman Solomon, you still have the floor?
Well, I'm not sure you heard my words. I do think you did a good job trimming this budget as much as you could and sharing the burden. And right before you got here, my encouragement was really if we do talk about cuts, such as not taking the CPI, we need to talk about where that's going to come from. And my point was it doesn't just have to be the departments that have to take that hit. It could be shared across everybody who gets revenue from the city because they're part of the community, they're part of the family. And so that was my encouragement, because I do believe, working this last year with the departments, they have done a very, very good job from where they started to where they are now in not only prioritizing the budget and all that, but trimming it down to where it's a manageable level. But there are opportunities we're going to miss because of that, and that's just part of the deal. So that was my encouragement to us, and it's hard when we're talking about community investments because we love these groups. There are some of these groups I really love. I think they're awesome. And some of them are very, very needed. There's no doubt about it. But they have to be part of that discussion, not just the departments. And that's the tough conversations we have to have. Mayor's given us what he thinks on this, but he's saying if you're cutting, don't just look at the departments. We can look at the community investments. So I'll yield. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Alderman Laurenti.
I just had one final thought on this particular conversation. And for me, it is that, and I think we all need to, and I think we all do understand, and maybe this is more for the viewers, but I just want to reiterate, I don't want to say I'm reiterating because I haven't said it yet. I just want to make a point that the budget has grown by more than, 10.5% over the last 2 years. So let's be very careful about using words like slashing and that type of thing, when in reality the budget still grew. And in last year it grew over by, I believe, close to 9.5%. So the average growth of the spending by city government is over 5% over the last 2 years. That is why this year it was extremely difficult for the mayor and for the departments, because we just aren't getting that kind of revenue. We aren't getting revenue that averages 5% growth. Now granted, I think the mayor and I think the council is working towards trying to increase revenues. There's some things hopefully with the internet sales tax, whether you agree with it or not, that might be a bump, but there's no guarantees with that. The reality is we need to try to grow the pie larger. I think the Civic Center vote was a big step in that direction. I hope that that pans out, and I think it will. I'm quite sure that it will. But the reality is the budget spending is exceeding good growth in revenue. Always has, unfortunately. It really has, and I'm going to send out those property tax and sales tax revenue growth numbers over the last 10 or 12 years. I can't remember what we drew up last year, Pauline, on that, but I know the sales tax revenue averaged over 4%. That is very good growth. We just have to make sure, as a council, that we're the checks and balances on the growth of the spending. That's what we're here for. The details are ultimately going to go back to the mayor and to the department heads, I think, honestly, to find the areas. Now, we can ask for a list of things outside of the departments as well, if there's other areas, as Alderman Solomon brought up with some of the community investments. I agree. They need to share the burden just like everybody else. When they get large increases, they're not in here saying, oh, I don't think you guys should do that. I don't think your revenues are going to come in at this increase that I just got. That never happens. So the reality is when the budget gets tight, so does their budget have to get tight, just like our citizens. We have to think about that. How many citizens have gained 5.5% or 5% over the last 2 years? Well, the city budget has grown an average of 5% over the last 2 years. How many of your citizens that you know have increased their revenues or their income by that same amount? And here we are getting ready to increase their property taxes again, increase their fees again on water, on building permits. We need to seriously think about what we're doing, because the reality is it's priorities, and that's what priority-based budgeting is about. And you heard the mayor say it, but the reality is they put these particular parts of their budget in quartiles. So if we need to not take the CPI because we're already passing a whole bunch of other fees on to the taxpayers, then so be it. They need to find the areas where those priorities are low. Or it might not be within their budgets. It might be what Mr. Solomon had said. It might be some other areas where we can spread it out over community investments, some other areas that are not within the departments. Because if I had to choose between departments like police and fire and finance and the attorney's office, all of the things that deliver services to our citizens, those things are going to get cut last. There are going to be these luxury items where we need to cut back even more if necessary. I yield.
Thank you. We currently have no one else in the queue. We just got someone else in the queue. Chair recognizes Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. just a few things that I'm thinking about, and I wonder if I can get them validated, since these comments have come up about the budget increases over the last few years. Can we get those numbers validated in a next session, so that if we are increasing our budget like 9 and 10% or whatever the numbers that were recited here earlier, can we get those numbers validated?
Pauline, is it possible to get the general fund for the last 5 years, what it was budgeted, not actuals or anything else, but just the budget as presented for the last 5 years for the general fund as well as the enterprise funds?
You want it for all of them or just the general fund?
I believe we'll need them for,
What number was Mr. Laurenti, was it for the general fund that he was?
Mr. Laurenti, are you just talking about the general fund, or are you talking about an overall $162 million budget? Which increase were you talking about year to year? Just the general fund or the overall budget?
I wasn't listening. I was engaged in a
That's
sidebar,
okay.
so I apologize.
Alderman Nordstrom has said that he would like to have, like, the last 5 years' worth of budget increases, but we're trying to narrow that down. Is it just the general fund budget increases, or maybe you want the general fund and then the full budget? Just
Yeah,
to
I think
know-
we want to have both. I mean, one can hide the other. It would be nice to see both where the increases were, but I think the overall budget increase last year was over 9%.
So Pauline, can we
I'm
get
not
those
sure,
two? One
but-
is just the general fund over the, as presented the last 5 years, and then the total budget over the last 5 years?
Yep, separate those, that would be good.
Yep, I can do that. I know that the general fund between 17 and 18 was about 4.5% increase. So, but I don't know I don't have the total in front of me right now.
So if we can get it for the last 5 years, 18 on back, budget as presented. Alderman Nordstrom, does that
That would
satisfy
be
your
very
request?
helpful. I just want to verify this information that I'm receiving tonight. And then also remember, we have to take into consideration from last year's budget presentation, there was some items that the mayor brought up as, here, we're growing in these particular areas. I'm not going to recite them all right now, but the mayor did a good presentation about what the growth areas were and some of the demands that are being placed upon the city. And so I'm thinking that some of that has to be taken into account as well. So that makes me concerned that if we're not seeing growth, then I can understand the argument or the rationale for some additional cuts above what the mayor has presented to us. He spent a lot of time in putting that current budget together, so I understand what he's attempting to do, but my concern now is that we're, as the mayor just recited, is that we're contemplating putting a machete to this now, whereas we're already cutting into the bone. So I'm very concerned about, just because of the demands that were placed upon the city last year, that's going to be used as rationale for the excuse for, or rationale, not excuse, but the rationale for cutting this year's budget further. And that makes me very concerned about, just because the city started to grow, and we have to do some cutting to the budget, which the mayor has already done. Now we're contemplating additional cuts to that. That makes me very concerned to apply that to the previous growth that we've done with the city. So, without reciting the entire list that the mayor presented from last year, that's where I'm at right now. Just a major concern for me, just additional cutting by machete. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Nordstrom. The only caveat that I'd like to add to that is, the budget is a projection, and there's nothing that says that those projected revenues are going to come in as projected. They could come in lower, which means that we already have a decrease that has to be managed. Otherwise, we're going to have to start loaning money to ourselves from our other funds and and come up with a plan to repay ourselves. I mean, there's only so much the city can do if the revenues are not coming in, and I know no one wants to hear about it, but I'm old enough, and I believe there's a lot of other citizens out there old enough. I'd like to remind everybody of 2008. So let's just keep that in mind.
Madam Chair.
Alderman Nordstrom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick response to that is that, yes, you're right. We did experience some tough times during the 2008 years with the city, and I don't want to go through that same process of just randomly picking something out of the budgets. For example, at that time, the Parks Department took the blunt of the whole budget process. This year, we have an opportunity to kind of manage it a lot better through the priority-based budgeting process. Those are tools that we can use on that. And I know I'm forgetting something else that I wanted to respond on this here as well, but it's just a very, very disconcerting that we're starting to cut additional funds from this, or contemplating additional cuts from this budget that the mayor has already made cuts, and then letting the departments making those choices where they've already done that and coming up with that. Now, if we want to take a look at it, community investments, in addition to this, I'm open to that, but they've already taken a hit on this budget as well. So that part of it is, that's another concern that I have. So we've had those communications with these community investments as well. Sorry if I'm rambling, but I'm just very concerned about the direction and the feeling that I'm getting right now of this current budget. So.
No, that's okay, Alderman Nordstrom. That's what this meeting's about, is council's discussion and opinion. So, but thank you for your thoughts. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to clarify, because of the comments that are being said here, that there are no cuts. There are 0 cuts. The budget is growing again. The overall budget is growing. That's not a cut. Now, they may have cut what they wanted to spend, but that's not a cut. Nobody out there agrees that when a budget grows that there's a cut. There are no cuts. Now, this is what federal government does. They call them cuts because it's not the growth we wanted, so therefore it's a cut. That's ridiculous. We're better than that. This budget is growing. This budget grew tremendously last year, and it's growing again this year. Not by what we wanted, but that's the whole point. We have to make priorities. We don't get everything we want, and the citizens have to do the same thing every year. And that's what we're here for. So we need to make sure that we do exactly what our citizens have to do. They don't get to go out and tax somebody else and raise revenues on somebody else's income. They don't get to do that. They have to spend what they make. And that's what we have to do, spend what we make. And we're not doing that, and that's why we're in the boat we're in today, because we did not hold the budget to where it should have been last year. We tried, but we couldn't get the votes. It all comes down to votes. We all know that. So we need to make sure we do it right this year. I yield.
Thank you. Alderman Laurenti. Alderman Nordstrom, are you back in the queue?
If I may.
Well, okay.
I just wanted to point out one more fact, is that the argument right now is that we're cutting the growth. And I'm having a hard time understanding that, so that's why I need those numbers to validate what is being said. So
Well, let me just back you up, because you stated that as a fact. Let's say it's your opinion, that that's what you're hearing, because that's not what I heard.
Okay.
So it's not a fact. It was your opinion that what you're hearing is.
Maybe I said something out of turn, but what I was leading up to is the fact is that part of the community investments are being cut. They are being cut. Their budgets were set last year, and they've been held at that number for a number of years. Now we are cutting them. They are taking a reduction, those community investments. And the mayor did a good job about explaining to them, and I've also tried to communicate it to as many as I could on the community investments. Stay tuned. Your budget is going to get cut back. So there is some legitimate cuts, and they are not growing. Those budgets are not growing.
Well, okay, so, and the reason I say let's stick to the facts, and I'm trying to marry up the conversations that I'm hearing, I would hope, in my opinion, I would hope that the community investments that the city involves itself in is not the totality of those organizations' budgets. So to sit here and say those budgets are being cut, we don't know. Because as Alderman Drew has pointed out several times, if they have friendship, community fundraising groups that help contribute to their budgets, and if they don't, they probably should start looking at one. But their budgets, I would hope that the community investments organizations that the city gives money to out of its budget to encourage the growth of the arts and the sports and keeping our kids safe and engaged, I would hope that the city's contribution is not their only funding source. So I believe, Alderman Nordstrom, I'm just trying to balance between these two. I think it's semantics here. It's if you want to curtail the discussion to the city is cutting its investment into that organization, that is a fact. At least that's the way the mayor presented it. But if you're going to say that organization has a budget, we don't know. Unless they want to open up their books and bring them forward, you know, I would hope that they would be able to do that. So it's the city portion. So, okay. You still have the floor, Alderman Nordstrom. All right, thank you. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Solomon.
And just to comment on that, you know, I think this community can step up to help with these community investment groups. As I was just saying to our department director, there's no Friends of the IT department group out there that's going to raise money for IT. Or, you know, yeah, or finance department is what she wants to be, or Friends of the City Attorney's Office, you know. We don't have that. So this is stuff that we have to take care of. We have to take care of that.
So just for clarification, Alderman Solomon, you're not referring that the IT department, the finance department, and any other department you mentioned is not a community investment?
They are. Here's the deal. The city collects their taxes to pay for services for the community that we deem essential. And these are things that we have, such as police, fire, and the administration of it all, public works, community planning, you know, IT, everything that it takes to do that. This is what we have to do. So we project revenues to pay for the operations of the city. As a community, though, we also understand that community investments are important. There are things that are very important for us to invest in. For example, detox is it's important for us to invest in that because the cost on the taxpayer of criminalizing everybody that could be treated, it's a better investment to spend $1 there to maybe save $5 down the road. And I think this council is smart enough to understand that. So when you do an investment, it is actually to help grow the revenue or help decrease the expenses. Wavy provides a huge service to our community. I think they serve a great function. In fact, all of these really do a fantastic job because we know Cornerstone, they serve the homeless people. How much resources are dealt with dealing with our homeless population, and if we can help serve and help people out of homelessness, that actually is less police resources that we have to use, which is one of our largest expenses. So those are wise community investments. So I'm all for community investments because the investments word is important because they are going to invest either in creating revenue or helping to control expenses. Because the question we have to ask ourselves with community investments are this: if they did not exist, how would that impact our budget? I do believe the arts serve a great purpose. And I said this last year, I'll say it again, I do believe the arts serve a great purpose because of the way of keeping kids out of trouble and community expression, quality of life, helping economic development because people like to live where it's beautiful and that expression. I do believe that's important. All of these are important. What I'm saying is they would all have to share the burden just like everybody else. So I do believe community investments are important. And don't get me wrong with my comments tonight, because I do believe they're important. And some of these, Humane Society serves a critical function. All of these serve critical functions, but they have to share the burden. And that's really what we have to ask. And so the difference, though, between a department and community investments is, like I said, we don't have certain groups looking out for all of our departments. That's us.
And that's the part you confused me on, sorry, because
Sorry.
that's what I was asking you. Were you
As a
qualifying or quantifying the IT department and the finance department as a community investment?
No, it was a joke to say we have community well, we have Friends of the Library.
Yes.
Library is an important function of the city. There is a group that will help. We have the parks. I don't want to necessarily cut those things because they've already cut a lot, but what I'm saying is there are certain parts of the city that don't have citizens ready to give money to them, additional money. That's called taxes. They expect that the taxes are paying for that. And so I think when we look at cutting, we have to look at things that are not going to get that extra support from the community. That was really my question. So I'm sorry if my dry sense of humor
Sorry, I
went
missed
over
it.
you. Went over your head, but that's why I said there's no friends of the IT department. I am a friend of the IT department, of course, but, and we all are. However, just picking on them a little bit. But that's my question. So I think this council does believe these community investments are worthy investments. However, they are not immune from the challenges that the rest of the city has. And in fact, we have to take care of the police first. I can't look at a fireman and say, you're not getting that car next year that you need, because I have to go do this, you know. I have to pick and choose, and that's part of the job. So just want to kind of throw, and this is a very philosophical discussion that we're having right now. I think that's good for a first night, because I'm not going to mention certain investments or cuts right now, but what I'm saying is this is the kind of stuff we have to think through. So it's a good discussion. I do appreciate your comments, Alderman Nordstrom, as well. I hear you all. This is good discussion, but that's where I'm coming philosophically. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Alderwoman Drew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify something about foundations and helpful groups and things like that, for our Parks Department, they formed a 501c3 that's separate of their group that can go out and raise money for them. Same thing with the library. They formed a 501c3 that can go out and raise money for their group. If the IT department really felt like it was necessary, they could form a separate 501c3 and go out and raise money so that they could get more whatever they need. But that's what happens in these groups. It's not that they just said, you know what, I just want more money. They said, we need more money to create the kind of environment that we want for our department. So they went out and they went through the paperwork and they went through the governmental steps and got the foundations and those kinds of things created so they could. But there's nothing saying that they couldn't. I mean, and I get calls from fire departments and police departments from everywhere saying, we need your money for whatever that is. You know, I usually don't give to them because I don't know who I'm talking to on the phone. But, you know, there are certainly a lot of groups that raise money for governmental entities, and I think that we have to be clear that it's different. The Parks Department and the Parks Foundation are two different things. The library and the Library Foundation are two different things. So that should help people understand, if they're listening, why there are groups that can raise money and others that can but don't.
Thank
And
you.
by the way, the arts just don't make you happy or smarter. They can make you money.
Thank you, Alderwoman Drew. Okay, there's currently no one else in the queue, so if the council members would indulge me, I'd like to go over. I have 6 points that were brought up for either information gathering or further discussion. The first one is the calculations for all the interdepartmental charges. That is a request for further data. The second one is a potential invite if we hold a second meeting, or we can have it at a council meeting if we don't hold a second meeting. But if we hold a second meeting, to invite potentially Sheriff Tom, Chief Jegaris, and a county commissioner to both come and help explain the operations of detox between the city and the county. Yep. We would like to see the agreements to know what the timeliness of the agreements are, and particularly Alderwoman Drew's question was, why is there a 23% increase from 2018 to 2019 budget? Item number 3 is a discussion of whether the CPI on property taxation should be taken, which amounts to $285,379. On that, I believe, Alderman Laurenti, that's the attorney answered your other question, so that is just a discussion item at this point. Following up with that, if there is any cuts that, well, not a cut, if there's any other alterations to the presented budget that would require some further reduction of expenses, that will be turned back over with a possible suggestion of what departments to be looked at, but that would be turned back over to the city staff and the finance office at that point. Item number 4 is a request of the last 3 years, which was 2015, 16, and 17, for the building department's revenues generated by fees as well as the expenses for those same years. Item number 5 was a consideration for potential reduction if any of the 3 revenue increase items that the mayor talked about, and I'll reiterate those again. One was the building fees, one was the interdepartmental charges, and the third one is the CPI. If any of those are considered not to be included in the budget, item number 5 is to consider not just city departments, but all entities that receive funding from the city, including community investments. We said that one a lot, but there's a lot of other entities that receive money that is not part of this defined community, but to consider all entities that receive funding from the city. And item number 6 is a request for the last 5 years budgeted, so we can see the percent increase, decrease from year to year for the last 5 years of just the general fund over a 5-year period, as well as the overall budget for the last 5 years. Am I missing anybody else's request for possible speakers or further data? Chair would like to recognize Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to double check, Mr. Laurenti, do you want me to bring back the historical sales tax data and property tax data? I had that listed,
Do you still have what we had from last year? I can send it back to you so that,
I'm pretty sure I
You
do,
don't-
and I can add on the most recent information as well.
that would be good.
Okay.
That would be great, thank you.
So item number 7, Pauline, I'm sorry, sales tax and property tax revenues for the last
I want to say I had 10 years on there.
years, last 10 years? Well, yeah, it would roll off, yeah, it would roll off, so. All right, so item number 7, thank you. Anything else from city council members? So then the other question I have for city council members is, based on the information that we're requesting and a potential invite, there's really only one invite that we're going to make based on what I've received tonight. Do we want to hold the second budget hearing, which is currently tentatively scheduled for next Tuesday, starting at 5:30? All right, can I just see a show of hands? I won't make Heidi call for a vote here, but I believe it's currently scheduled. It looks like everyone is in favor of holding a second budget hearing. So I would hope that during the next budget hearing, we can have a good discussion. We will still also have to make 2 readings. The first one will be presented before City Council on Tuesday, September 4th. The second one, roughly 13 days later, September 17th, whatever that Monday is. And we can adopt or change or modify the budget at those readings. We can also entertain potential changes at the second budget hearing as well. So we will notice it so that decisions and possible motions can be made. Chair would like to recognize Alderwoman Modrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to clarify on the meeting next week, you'd mentioned that we have several of the invites. However, won't this meeting also have public attendance and public opportunity for conversation or comments?
If we have a quorum, then we will offer up general public comment. However, we will still run our same rules, that if anybody comes to talk, they will be limited to 3 minutes, and it's only general public comment, so we will hear them first, and then we will carry on with our business after that.
Thank you. That's important to determine how the meeting should go for the next one, so that it's not just felt by the public that it's just a limited invitation, as well as I think a notice needs to go out to the departments, because in this conversation that I listened to tonight, anything is up for discussion, and if we don't have departments here to answer some of the questions, then we won't be doing ourselves a favor here. We will, nor will we be helping them as well, getting through either budget cuts or budget increases, because it could go either way.
So
as
Alderwoman
well as our
Modrick,
community investments.
so Alderwoman Modrick, this is what I was asking about, if you wanted to hear from any. So are you saying you want a request to go out for all department directors?
I think they need to be notified that
Okay.
that is how this agenda is set, and that the
So-
discussion is open for what I heard tonight is anything on this budget is subject to decrease or increase, so I think that's only fair that we make sure that the departments are aware of that.
So Pauline, if you want to also include that as far as the invitation goes, that Alderwoman Modrick would like to request all department directors be available at next Tuesday's meeting? or if they are, the department director is not available, have a representative available for any potential questions. Yes, and the mumbling, because mics aren't on, is to have Sean, who is, I believe he's the author, or at least the repository for keeping the calculations of the interdepartmental charges as well, but have Sean available. Okay. Chair recognizes Alderman Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick note, do we need a county commissioner here? Can it be a staff member who's familiar with the Care Center project?
I'm going to go back to Alderwoman Drew, because Alderwoman Drew is the one
Okay.
that specifically named potentially having a county commissioner. She might want the elected official to at least be able to give their opinion on their contribution from the county side, but I'll defer to Alderwoman Drew. I currently have Sheriff Tom, Chief Jegaris, and a county commissioner. Who would you like invited, if not those three people?
Sheriff Tom is very knowledgeable on a lot of this stuff. So if we can't get a commissioner, I'm satisfied with Sheriff Tom being here.
So you would still like a county commission, an invitation made to a
I would like
county
an
commissioner?
invitation. If they, if they can't make it, they can't make it. But, since they're going through these discussions right now, I think it'd be just helpful to have them or someone from their offices come here to talk to us about what they're doing. Because right now, they're discussing some of the same things we are with the mental health, detox, all the situations that we're trying to rectify with our transient populations.
I believe the current, I could be wrong, but I believe the current county chairman, president, or
Yeah, Lloyd LaCroix.
is Lloyd LaCroix, and I believe the vice is Mark DeSanto. So, Alderwoman Drew, is there a specific county commission you want to hear from, or just put out the request starting?
My first choice would be Lloyd,
That's what I was saying,
Yeah.
start with a chairman? Is he a chairman? Is he a?
And plus, he's very, very knowledgeable about what we're looking at, so, yeah,
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. I just want to only invite people that can speak really on the issue. And I knew that they have staff members who are very knowledgeable, Sheriff being one of them. So, thank you.
Okay. Yep.
All right, Chair would like to recognize Alderman Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to chime in on this a little bit, because I'm sure that you remember a few years ago, which could have been 4 or 5 now, as quickly as time goes, but we did have the Director of Detox in here, and we asked them many, many questions, and they were very knowledgeable, and that's who I would recommend. If you really want to talk about detox, get the director in here, because they will know all the ins and outs. The sheriff knows, how it's ran, how it's managed, but they don't know, they don't have those numbers, they don't have the things, the real questions that you may want to ask, and neither will the commissioners. They know, how it's ran. That's like asking us to go to the county to explain how IT runs, it's just not going to happen.
Or IT
I know, but I
department.
had to pick on him too, so. So,
I want to invite IT.
Okay, so I'll change my recommendation to the head of detox.
Well, what we can do is include, if we're going to invite and have this good discussion on the detox, I would recommend Alderwoman Drew that we try to invite a county commissioner,
that.
the
I'd love
sheriff, the chief of police will already be here because of the department, but
Yeah.
go ahead and include the director of detox as well.
Okay, thank
And
you.
put out that invitation. If they can make it, they can make it. We would love to hear from them.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alderman Roberts. So, just clean up. Pauline, I believe we've already scheduled next Tuesday's meeting. It will be noticed, so I don't think we have to take a vote on it or anything, do we?
However, if you guys think at this point, or even some point during the day on Tuesday, that you think that we'll need the meeting on Wednesday, we will either have to notice it and say tentative, or not have the meeting, I guess, because we have to have the 24-hour notice, and so being as it's the very next day, we can't decide at the end of the meeting on Tuesday that we're going to have a meeting on Wednesday.
Wednesday. So council members, can I have your attention again? So with the items that we discussed tonight, and we made it in about 90 minutes, we started this meeting at 5:30, it's currently 7 o'clock. Is there the thought that we will be able to get through at the next meeting to basically answer most of our questions so that we can go to first and second reading? Any follow-up could be done at first and second reading? Or is there a thought or desire to hold a third budget hearing, because we could go ahead and notice it, we could probably even notice it if needed, but go ahead and schedule it out for Tuesday and Wednesday and cancel?
That's what I would probably recommend doing.
So that we could call on Tuesday if it gets too late, and then, if needed. So Pauline, if that's possible, let's go ahead and notice both meetings. Next Tuesday at 5:30, I believe it's the 28th of August, followed by Wednesday, August 29th, starting at 5:30. And on the Wednesday one, it can be as needed or if needed, so that everyone knows that at least they can tune in Tuesday to find out if we're going to reconvene on Wednesday night at 5:30, or if we'll wrap up next Tuesday. And then again, we will have 2 readings, and I believe also the readings of the budget go through Legal and Finance. So it'll actually have 4 opportunities for further discussion or amendments, because it'll go through Legal and Finance for 2 readings, followed by City Council readings for 2 readings. So, all right. If there is no further discussion, I'm seeing no one in the queue. We have done all of our discussion and work for tonight. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Got a motion by Nordstrom to adjourn, second by Drury. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.